Hey everyone, in case you haven't been listening to the end of the episodes, this will be our last one for a couple months while we gear up for Lord of the Rings and take a break and one of us goes traveling. So thanks for getting to this point. We should have a bit of content over the next couple months just to hold you over. But yeah, Lord of the Rings to come this summer. Recording?
I am indeed.
Yeah, I'm recording. All right, cool. Then let's do it. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Patrick.
And I'm Clifford.
Yeah, and we're here for the last chapter of The Hobbit. Clifford, we've come a long way.
We have.
But I think Bilbo's come further than us.
Probably. It's taken a little longer than a couple weeks to...
Well, this was a couple months. Yeah.
Okay.
And we had some practice episodes that nobody got to see, you know.
We did.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think we've grown as much as Bilbo over this podcasting adventure.
So what are we discussing this episode?
All right, well, this is all about coming home, returning. So Bilbo stops off at Rivendell. We'll talk about that really quick. Then we just got a bunch of hero steps to finish off, so we're going to roll through like 3 of those. They're all about his return. And then we'll talk about the very ending of the book and that last conversation with Gandalf. Cool. But before all that, let's do our last Hobbit, Cliff's Notes.
So, Bilbo and Gandalf continue onwards to Rivendell from Beorn's estate, if you remember. They arrive at Rivendell, the last, or first, homely home of Elrond. Bilbo is delighted to see the elves, singing and joyous in their beautiful valley. Gandalf shares his tales of the journey to Elrond and the other elves, most of which Bilbo sleeps through, although he perks up to hear what Gandalf was up to for most of the story. Gandalf, we find out, went to a meeting of the White Wizards, who traveled to the south of Mirkwood to banish the necromancer from the land. During this week of rest, Bilbo recovers, and they set off again. They pass by the buried treasure of the trolls, which is untouched, and continue on to the Shire. Bilbo's quite wistful, but overjoyed to be returning home. When he arrives at last, he finds himself in the midst of his own estate sale, watching his relatives auction off his possessions. His return creates a disturbance, and he is never quite trusted in the Hobbit community again, once he is settled back in. Even once he is settled back in. Gandalf and Balin, among others, pay him a visit at the end, where they reflect back on the journey there and back again. What did you think, Patrick?
I thought it was a good last chapter.
Mm-hmm.
What about you?
I enjoyed it. It was... Yeah, I know we've been saying this ending's been moving quickly, and he's been tying up loose ends pretty quickly, or very efficiently, I should say. This last chapter was a nice little twist, I thought. Made us I think he did a good job of making us think harder about what the journey's meant and where it's taken us, where it's taken Bilbo.
I agree. I really did enjoy that because it felt like closure, but because it didn't feel as rushed as the other ones.
So let's move through this beginning part briefly. They swing by Rivendell, which we've talked about before. We know it's the most amazing place ever, according to Bilbo. I had a few procedural questions. Is it just Gandalf and Bilbo at this point? It kind of sounds at a few points like the company is smaller. But
yeah,
I don't hear about anyone else.
I think it was just those two.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't hear about anybody else either.
Have Elrond and his elves been up to anything since we left them? Have they had any involvement?
Kind of hard to tell. Doesn't really sound like it from anything that we've heard.
I get the impression no, but like, do the elves talk to each other? Like, did Elrond, was he in communication with the woodland elf king? Anything like that? Or are they just different wavelengths?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, those elves they're not quite, related to each other. Like we talked before, Elrond's part of like the high elves that went to the west and then came back. Like he's descendants of them. Whereas the elves of Mirkwood are kind of just like the ones that have always been in Middle Earth and have stayed here.
Right. So, okay. So they're not that close. We assume Elrond didn't really know what was going on if Gandalf was telling him now.
Or, well, that doesn't mean he doesn't know, but he didn't know the full story clearly.
Okay,
Gandalf
fair.
had to tell it.
Fair. And then I was intrigued at some of this mention of white wizards and a necromancer, but I have a feeling you're going to tell me I've got to hold my breath for Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, so that's the deal. Is I wanted to kind of just use this episode as kind of like a teaser for Lord of the Rings and everything, but upon further review, we have so much to talk about, and our other episodes have gone long, so I think we're going to have to do creative things with that in the interim that will be coming up instead. But
right.
more details on that.
I will
later.
accept it.
Yeah. Well, you have to, Clifford. I don't have anything prepared.
Okay, moving on. Any other things you particularly enjoyed about this little venture into Rivendell?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the song, the Elves song.
Sweet. Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, if you want to read it really quick.
The dragon is withered, his bones are now crumbled. His armor is shivered, his splendor is humbled. Those swords shall be rusted, and throne and crown perish, with strength that men trusted, and wealth that they cherish. Here grass is still growing, and leaves are yet swinging, the white water flowing, and the elves are yet singing. Come tra-la-lolly, back to the valley. The stars are far brighter than gems without measure. The moon is far whiter than silver in treasure. The fire is more shining on hearth in the gloaming than gold won by mining, so why go a-roaming? Oh, tra-la-lolly, come back to the valley. Oh, where are you going, so late in returning? The river is flowing, the stars are all burning. Oh, whither so laden, so sad and so dreary? Here, elf and elf maiden, now welcome the weary. Come tra-la-lolly, come back to the valley. Tra-la-lolly, fa-la-lolly, fa-la.
All right, nice.
Was I musical enough for you there with my tra-la-las?
Not quite. Those are kind of mechanical.
Tra-la-la-la-la-la.
Yeah, I'm not saying I could do better. So nice job,
okay.
Clifford. All right.
This was an interesting song to me because it's overall very positive. Like, come on back to our beautiful place, and the dragon's dead, etc. But there's some things that confuse me a little bit. And throne and crown perish with strength that men trusted, and wealth that they cherish. What's that about? Kind of sounds like the men won, but their kingdom will fail, or something like that.
I mean, yeah, I think you're on there with that part. But what I was also more confused about too is like they were kind of saying like, what was the point of this whole adventure? For treasure that eventually will be lost or will rust, and like what you're saying, the kingdoms of men will like collapse. Yeah,
the only constant is the elves and the nature in the valley. The water's still flowing, the sun is still shining, the elves are still singing. All this nonsense with men and kings and treasure is temporal.
Yeah, so that kind of makes us wonder, like, well, was Bilbo's whole adventure this whole time? Was this a waste of time? For him to go on this with the dwarves?
Right.
Maybe
Bilbo feels that way. Maybe this song is resonating with him.
No, because...
You don't think so?
No, because, well, I'm also, I got this from notes from books. but I mean, if we go back to the last chapter, Bilbo was talking to the dying Thorin, and he was saying, no, this adventure wasn't a waste of time, It's, despite all of the trials and tribulations and adventures that we had, and actually more so probably because of them, Bilbo's better off, and this was worth it for him to go on with the friends that he made, being the dwarves.
Okay.
The other thing about it too is it's pretty clear Bilbo never went to go win a huge treasure. I mean, sure, he wanted to get treasure and everything, but like the material profit of the journey was never his primary motive. Like clearly,
that's an interesting way to look at it.
Because if it was, he probably would have fallen for the dragon sickness that Thorin and all the other people fell for.
Right, and not given up most of his treasure.
Right.
On his return.
Yeah, he went on this treasure. All right, he went on this adventure, kind of as you could kind of say like a reboot for himself, or to go through a transformation.
But I've got to ask, how much of this feels to you like it was orchestrated by Gandalf? Like when Bilbo set off, it was primarily because Gandalf kind of kicked him out the door. He definitely realizes at some point, like, hey, this is a good thing for me. I like this adventure. His initial motivation might have not been motivation at all.
Well, in one of our either our first or second episode, we said, yeah, Gandalf's totally encouraging him to do this, but it was at some point Bilbo himself that said, yes, I am going to do this. Like, he said yes.
Okay.
That he would go and decided to do this. It wasn't like Gandalf just completely pushed him into this and Bilbo had no say about it. Okay.
So speaking of Gandalf, Gandalf has a nice line to Bilbo here. Remind me, where's this at exactly?
It was right after they were getting back, and like they could see the hill, I think. So Bilbo's hill. So
okay.
They were just about home, but not quite.
I know exactly what you're talking about. You're going to have to cut this out. Oh, yeah. Bilbo sees his own hill in the distance, and he breaks into song.
Yeah, and then after the song,
Gandalf exclaims, "My dear Bilbo, something is the matter with you. You are not the hobbit that you were."
Yeah, so this was kind of one of the last examples of that explicit narrator back again. Like, Bilbo, like we were just saying, he didn't go on the adventure for the treasure or the reward or anything. He went on there to be transformed, and, Gandalf's explicitly saying, like, wow, look at how much you've basically grown up over this adventure.
Right.
You're much more wise, much more virtuous, probably even morally upright than you were before. So, and I mean, yeah, we've kind of seen examples of all that as we went, like the steps where he took those and gained more in those qualities,
Well, speaking of gaining in qualities, why don't you explain how we round out the hero's journey?
I can be your hero, baby. There goes my hero. Watch him as he goes. I'm a hero.
All right, so our third to last hero's journey step.
The penultimate step.
All right, so for this one, this step is crossing the return threshold. So, just to play Captain Obvious, we had already had one that was crossing the threshold, but now we're recrossing back into kind of normal life. So this is kind of self-explanatory.
Now, if I recall, one of our perfect examples for crossing the threshold was Alice in Wonderland, right?
That was one of yours, yeah.
Well, we decided that was a good example.
Yes, we did. Yeah.
Okay, or I did at least.
Right. Okay. Yeah. It is.
So this is now in that sort of fairy tale sense. We've entered a magical world. A bunch of events have happened. Our main character is transformed, and now this is probably the key step in coming out of that magical world.
Yeah, and so, I don't know. Again, every story... This one's actually probably one that gets hit, but it could probably easily be glossed over. But anyways, some of the notes I was taking from websites in the book is, at last the hero returns to home turf when they are safe from further pursuit or woes. Crossing the threshold may not be an easy task, as one last challenge may face the hero. What did Wikipedia say? The trick in returning is to retain wisdom gained on the quest, to integrate that wisdom into human life, and then figure out how to share the wisdom with the rest of the world. All right, that's not very applicable to The Hobbit. I'll probably cut that part out. This one was really good. This is in the book itself. So, his return is described as coming back out of that yonder zone. Nevertheless, the two kingdoms are actually one. The realm of the gods, that's just any, like, the fairy realm, whatever.
Right.
The realm of the gods is a forgotten dimension of the world we know. Exploring that dimension is deed of the hero. Values and distinctions that in normal life seem important disappear. All right. So, again, we got like 3 of these to do, so we kind of got to blow through examples a little bit.
I'll tie this in. Okay, you go ahead. Sorry.
All right, so Star Wars, we got to, I was really grasping at straws for this one, and the best I could do, and it's totally out of place, but what I was thinking was, this is actually like when Luke goes back to his home planet of Tatooine at the beginning of the 6th one, to save Han Solo from Jabba the Hutt. It's like, it's not, he hasn't finished the, it's completely out of place, but I couldn't think what else would actually come close, but he is kind of returning to, he's crossing back over a threshold to what he knew and grew up with,
Right, a level of normalcy for him.
Yeah. That was the best I could do. Any examples real quick for you? I got one
wonderful example of Alice in Wonderland, leaving Wonderland.
I don't remember that part.
I don't, frankly, either. But you gave Wizard of Oz last time.
Yeah. That's what I was also thinking. Is this step is really close with the rescue from without.
Right. That's true. I think this one's easy to see in any fantasy or fairy tale thing where you have someone who is literally transported somewhere else. This is the part where they go back, right?
Right. But this is. I
think it's trickier when the narrative is more gradual.
This one's well, sometimes it's easy if there's like if there's a world, it's easier. But I think this is more so where the rescue from without is like the magical way to send them back. This is like what happens once they're sent back.
Right.
And so for the most dramatic and awesome example of that, we have to go to a very wonderful movie.
Help me, Clarence! Get me back! Get me back! I don't care what happens to me! Get me back to my wife and kids! Help me, Clarence, please! Please! I want to live again! I want to live again! I want to live again! Please, God, let me live again.
Yeah, so, Wonderful Life, this is where George Bailey... Oh, you haven't seen this movie, have you?
I think I saw it a long time ago.
All right. Well,
Hey, George!
It's pretty famous because the guy...
George!
The main character, George, wishes he had never been born, and then he actually gets his wish to see, like, what his life would have been like without him, and then all of a sudden he gets back because he saw he had a wonderful life. That's where the movie comes from.
You kidding?
So,
I've been looking all over town trying to find you.
Yeah,
I saw your car piled into that tree down there, and I thought maybe hey, your mouth's bleeding. Are you sure you're all right? What you... My mouth's bleeding, Bert! My mouth's bleeding! Zuzu pedals! Zuzu... There they are! Bert! What do you know about that? Merry Christmas! Well, Merry Christmas! Merry! Yay! Yay! Hello, Bedford Falls!
His screaming is far more aggressive than I remember.
Yeah, pretty sweet movie though. Hopefully we talk about it more in Lord of the Rings.
All right, looking forward to it.
Obviously one of my favorites, as it should be everybody's favorite. That's why that's obvious.
So this stuff is pretty straightforward for The Hobbit, right?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, well, so yeah.
we might be able to argue about the specifics of where specifically this step occurs, but more or less it's the return to the Shire.
Well, we don't know it's called the Shire yet, Clifford. Come on.
Oh, sorry. It's the return to Bilbo's home and the hill.
No, you don't have to say the second part. I'm going to leave in the part where you said the Shire.
All right.
We're just being strict. Yeah, I kind of think... we had said they crossed the threshold after Rivendell on the way out, actually, like when they got to the Misty Mountains. But here I'd say it's kind of when he comes back and they're having the auction at his house. Yeah,
it feels to me like it's as soon as he literally sees his house, because, like, for all of the adventures they've passed along the way and recovering the troll's treasure, all of that is in the realm of adventures further from home than he's ever been. So I think it's like seeing his house is kind of, that's enough for him to believe it.
Yeah, and I think this one kind of incorporates, like the auction part incorporates that last little challenge of actually returning, that they were talking about in the description a little bit. It's also interesting to note that the auction, for all intents and purposes, is kind of his funeral, really.
Right.
So it's kind of funny because he's basically coming back from the dead, which, that could be like a renewed self or, transformed, grown self.
I have some more thoughts on that at the end of this, actually. But let's make it through these other two hero's journey steps before we get there.
All right.
I can be your hero, baby. There goes my hero. Watch him as he goes. I'm a hero. Be larger than life.
The second to last hero's journey step.
The penultimate hero's journey step.
Okay, so this one is the Master of Two Worlds. Ooh. So, having completed the journey out and back in, the hero is now master of both the domestic and alien worlds and can pass over the threshold between the two without further trial. Another thing, for a human hero, it may mean achieving a balance between the material and spiritual. The person has become comfortable and competent in both the inner and outer worlds. Freedom to pass back and forth across the world division, from the perspective of the apparitions of the time to that of the casual deep and back. Okay. So, this was kind of cool.
Yeah, definitely. It implies, I don't know, like confidence.
So this
skill.
One, yeah. So in Star Wars, this one's kind of a little bit difficult because I think it's kind of implied that it happened, but basically, I think Yoda had kind of given Luke the deal, like, okay, you're basically a Jedi, but until you confront Vader and basically win him over, you're not a full Jedi Knight. So then after all the adventures, when he's at the end of the movie celebrating, then he is kind of a full Jedi Knight. Also, just thought of this too, when he's seeing the ghosts of Obi-Wan, Yoda, and his dad at the end of the movie, and like everybody else is partying, but then he can stop and he can see the ghosts. Then again, it's more so the ghosts are appearing to him as opposed to him being able to summon them. I feel like that kind of represents it too. That he's got both worlds going on.
Right.
But mostly that he's just a full Jedi at this point.
It also seems like, in some ways, this is about being a normal person, but then also being conscious of the extraordinary circumstances or experiences that he's just gone through.
Right. Yeah. But anyways, just to get another example in here, before we talk about that, the other great one that I thought of right away was at the end of the first Matrix movie, where Neo, he knows he's the one, he's won everything for this movie and like saved the day and everything, but then he's like talking in a phone booth like, oh, I don't know, like basically intimidating the bad guys kind of, and then just getting us pumped up. And then all of a sudden he walks out and they're playing all the cool music, and then he's got his glasses on, and then they just zoom out, and then all of a sudden you see him fly up, like he can fly while he's in the Matrix. It's like, oh man, so like he knows he's like basically in master command of all his powers and everything, and he's the real deal in this world and in the other one. All right, what do we think about The Hobbit, though?
The Hobbit, this is Bilbo... In a broad way, this is Bilbo being comfortable with adventure. The hobbits, we've learned, are wary of adventure. Besides the Tooks, Bilbo has embraced the Took side, or gone above and beyond his Took bloodline to embrace adventure. His comfort with that and like the kind of peculiarities that it entails, I think, is his mastery, and it's evidenced in his visitors. Like, he gets elves and dwarves and Gandalf occasionally at his front door, which weirds out the other hobbits, we've heard. Everyone thinks he's sort of an oddball, but he's able to exist like in full recognition of this other world that he's experienced.
Yeah, I think you nailed it on the head. I think this one paragraph here really sums it up. Indeed, Bilbo found he had lost more than spoons. He had lost his reputation. It is true that forever after he remained an elf friend, and had the honor of dwarves, wizards, and all such folk as ever passed that way. But he was no longer quite respectable. He was, in fact, held by all the hobbits of the neighborhood to be queer, except by his nephews and nieces on the Took side. But even they were not encouraged in their friendship by their elders.
Mm-hmm.
So his losing the reputation is... He's welcomed back into the Hobbit society, and he lives back in his somewhat usual life. Then again, we'll talk about that it's not quite the same as when he had originally left.
Right.
But, at the same time, like what we were saying, like the other world still exists, and he's aware of that. Like, he's literally meeting elves as they pass through and everything.
Right.
So he's got a foot in both worlds. Like, he knows what's going on with the hobbits, but he knows what's going on with elves.
But I think it's also important,
like
his sort of confidence or self-assuredness that he can do both those things is an important aspect of it.
Right.
Like, he's not trying to pretend like he hasn't seen this other world. Right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Like, he's comfortable with his visitors. He's not trying to fit back in as a normal guy with the rest of the hobbits. He's okay being a little bit weird.
Well, he's actually kind of uncomfortable with some of the visitors, like the Sackville-Bagginses, who should have inherited his house. Like, they're forever... They hold a grudge against him for the rest of their lives.
For coming back.
Yeah.
Coming back to life.
Yeah, so and that's it's important to note too, like, if Bilbo had stayed, he either already was the same ilk, basically, as those Sackville-Bagginses, caring about, like, inheriting a big fancy house.
Right.
And now he's no longer really comfortable even hanging around them, because...
Right.
I mean, yeah, first of all, there's a personal grudge, but then also it's just, that's not who he is anymore.
Right.
And now, finally, the last step on the hero's journey. Have you ever heard this song? Have you heard the song that I cut in every single time?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, I think I gotta play it, Clifford. Here,
right.
Let me see if I can get it. What a 22-second masterpiece. Look at me.
How many songs you cut together?
There's only 3, but yeah.
Okay. That's okay.
All right. So, Clifford, that's what you've been missing out on when you don't listen to your own podcast.
I promise that it's been on my agenda. I haven't been listening to anything at work lately.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, we've been playing music out loud, so I haven't been listening to stuff.
Oh, that's kind of fun. All right. Okay. Anyways, we gotta do the last step here then. All right. So, what's the last step? Freedom to live. Okay, interesting one. I don't quite know where this one's going off first look, but I do because I researched it. So, at last, having conquered the demons without and within, the hero has earned the right to live as they choose. The life of the hero may hence take many paths, often one of wisdom. They may become rulers, teachers, or advisors. They may get married and settle down, or perhaps go adventuring again. Mastery leads to the freedom from fear of death, which in turn is the freedom to live. This is sometimes referred to as living in the moment, neither anticipating the future nor regretting the past. Kind of cool. Yeah. Should we do... All right, so for Star Wars... Okay, this one's like... just at best implied. At best. So... Well, actually, if we watch like the new ones, like 7 and 8 or whatever, it sounded like Luke actually did set up like another Jedi temple or whatever. But at the end of the sixth one, it was kind of, you could kind of assume that, yeah, he would train somebody else up after him at least, you know, to pass on the Jedi ways probably, because he couldn't just be the last one by himself and then just die. I mean, that was kind of, that's fair to assume. And at the same, and even if he wasn't going to do that, I mean, it's the living in the moment part. He was clearly just set up to do that if he wasn't already doing it. Yeah. My other example was the great movie of Hidalgo. The guy came back. The guy and the horse, notably. The guy being, I think his name is Frank, and the horse was...
His name's Aragorn?
No, his name's Frank. But anyways, that guy gets back. First of all, that guy literally was the master of two worlds. Like, he was winning races in America, and he could literally win... He could go over and win races in Arabia. You know, he's proven himself like a true champion and, you know, fulfilled all these... He was a true hero and fulfilled these steps. But then at the end of the movie... He sets the horse free, and the horse is free to go live wherever it wants, roaming around the Great Plains. And then he himself is also kind of free to, I think he's like at peace with his ancestors and how, because I think he was like half Indian, half, I don't know, European descent.
Okay.
You know, half white. That's the word. Yeah, so those are the examples there. Any examples for you?
No.
Okay.
This one actually, I think, is a harder one than we would expect to pick out because it's way more open ended.
Yeah, it kind of is. Well, so I mean, we can kind of look at the one part. It could take many paths. Often one of wisdom. So I don't know. They were already saying.
This sounds actually to me. I'll be the devil's advocate here. This sounds like a made-up step to fit in with whatever happens in a story after the crossing of the return threshold and the Master of Two Worlds. Those both seem like very real hero's journey steps to me. This sounds like a fill-in-the-blank for whatever the last part of the book is after those two.
I feel like you could lump all three together, and they're kind of one or at most two steps. I kind of agree with that. Like you can't...
Like the Master of the Two Worlds to me implies a level of confidence and freedom.
Yeah, I feel like this one's attached to either one of those. Either one of the past two that we've done. But anyways, this one's real. I think like the living in the moment's a good thing to key off of, and then like passing down your wisdom and knowledge. And it said, you know, some of his crazy side of the family, nieces and nephews, liked hearing his stories and learning from him. So maybe he's passing down knowledge to them. Maybe it's not even knowledge, it's just entertaining tales that nobody really quite believes. And then meanwhile, the living in the moment part, you know, he kind of gets back, and for all intents and purposes, he's kind of on an extremely small scale, like how Thorin and the dwarves returned to the mountain and Thorin became king of the mountain. On an extremely small scale, Bilbo's kind of returned, and he's back king of his own mini little castle hole here.
King under the hill.
Yeah, and so I got a kind of good... I thought it was a good quote here from Joseph Pierce's book. So, the new king of Bag End rules his kingdom in a radically different way from the old king. Whereas the old Bilbo was very protective of his reputation and desired to be seen as respectable by his neighbors, we are told that the new Bilbo did not mind the loss of his reputation and respectability. He was quite content, and the sound of the kettle on his hearth was ever after more musical than it had been even in the quiet days before the unexpected party. Home is sweeter for the absence. Everything is made new, even the smallest things, especially the smallest things, such as a kettle on the hearth. The new Bilbo sees the old things with new eyes, and he sees that they are good, indeed better than he had ever imagined them to be.
I like that. That home is sweeter with the absence.
Right, and again, I think that, that's kind of tied into, like, the Master of Two Worlds, or it's tied into the Return, but I don't know. According to the book...
This comes back to the song that Bilbo is singing.
Yeah.
which I felt like the way that I thought it was going, or the way that some of it felt like it was set up, was a classic, oh, the adventure's over now, I've come back, but actually I'm kind of sad because at the end of the day, the adventure was fun, and, you know, maybe my life wasn't that great, and this was my calling, etc., etc. You know, I feel like that's kind of a common trope. But instead, it's actually like, it's like an uncomplicated satisfaction that Bilbo feels. Like, there's none of that. Like, he's maybe wistful, but it's coming back home with full satisfaction. Like, nothing has ever been like so satisfying, so fulfilling for him to return.
Yeah, and so you had, before we started this, one of the questions you had sent me was, Bilbo remains an unsung hero. You know, is he part of like the silent generation of World War One? And I think,
yeah, oh yeah. So okay, let me expand upon that real quick.
Yeah, go for it.
When he comes back, he is, we've gathered, pretty isolated. Like, his own family thinks he's kind of a nutcase, or some of them do at least. He's interacting with some of the grandkids, but not many. And no one really knows what he did. They just see these strange visitors now and then. So, in more ways than one, he's an unsung hero. He was even an unsung hero with the dwarves. Like, he might have gotten some direct credit, but he didn't inherit any throne or anything like that. Although arguably he was critical to their success. And then in his own community, he's like a secret. That whole concept of him being an unsung hero, that like has a couple different dimensions to it. But it made me think. We were talking recently about this World War I documentary that Peter Jackson helped restore or put together, that we both saw. Thinking on World War I felt like there's a lot of parallels.
Maybe that's there. I feel like we'll actually see that more in Lord of the Rings, possibly.
Okay.
Not to just push everything off to Lord of the Rings, but I feel like this was more so like Bilbo just really didn't care because of what we're saying. Like, he's happy to be home. You know, nobody really believes his adventures, but he doesn't care that he lost his reputation. I mean, it's not just like, I just feel like that's not a concern for him.
Right.
I mean, I'm not saying like it's not there at all, but it's just, yeah, it's not a big deal. I don't know. You know,
it's interesting.
Like,
I mean,
like if you're the master of two worlds, you know, I feel like he just doesn't care about this at this point. Like, this is one of the things, like it's too trivial for him to.
That's fair, but I still see a parallel. Like, one thing that really shocked me from that documentary was talking about the soldiers returning and from World War I to Britain, and how basically no one wanted to talk about the war. It was like they were all kind of celebratory and happy, and then they got home and everyone was like, you know, hush hush, no celebrations for you, we don't want to talk about it. And either at best you're just kind of quietly accepted back into society, or at worst you're shunned for somehow being involved with a complicated political conflict. And they're talking about some of these signs like no GIs need apply, basically, which was fascinating to me because, like, you know, we don't really talk about soldiers or veterans in that way anymore.
Well, I think first of all, hold on. That, first of all, I think depends on the war and the outcome of the war. Like, World War II.
Agreed.
World War II definitely had a better homecoming than World War I or the Vietnam War.
Agreed.
Then what I'd also say too is, well, we don't actually know, when he's telling the stories to the few hobbits that would listen, how much is he talking about the Battle of Five Armies, which was the most reminiscent thing of World War I? Maybe he's talking about like the fun adventures where he really grew as a person, as opposed to the terrible conflict parts of it that
True.
were
Well, regardless,
really raw, you know.
He's still sort of an outcast, sort of a pariah, and it made me think, Tolkien, having fought in World War I and probably experienced some of this weirdness, like cultural silence about the war, I can't not see a parallel there. And I wonder, like, maybe what you were saying, like how there's a generally positive spin to it, like Bilbo's pretty content, he doesn't really care. If that's Tolkien maybe projecting like the positive way to deal with that, or like the upside of that sort of silence. I still see, like, I can't, I can't believe that there wouldn't be any sort of connection there, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying I disagree with you, but maybe that's in there. I don't think we know enough about like these hobbits at all. The only hobbit we really know is Bilbo, and
Fair.
Luckily, we'll soon get to learn a lot about hobbits.
Okay.
And I think what you're talking about, I feel like there's a more explicit example in Lord of the Rings, but
okay,
we're gonna have to
I will hold out.
I'm not
My
saying,
assumption
I'm not
is
saying I
that,
disagree.
although we don't know much about the hobbits, we have assumed that where Bilbo lives is comparable to the British countryside,
right?
And has parallels to where Tolkien grew up. So.
Yeah.
And Bilbo is, in some ways, an autobiographical character.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's all true.
I probably will end up believing that Tolkien is reading Bilbo's return as sort of like his own return. Like he's maybe comfortable being quiet old man, but has this like this whole other world from what he's seen that his community has not participated in.
Yeah, but either way, I think you got to put there's clearly a positive spin on it too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So on this note, in a broader way, how do you feel about the ending of the book? What was your overall take?
I really liked it. I think he did a good job. It was a nice conversation. You know, Gandalf coming back. We even see Balin again, and then the conversation was quick, but it was good. And then there's a big discussion here for us. So, what did you think of the end?
I enjoyed it as well. Kind of like I was saying at the beginning, the whole sort of quasi conflict at the end, coming home to his own estate sale, was I think a good twist, and although part of it kind of seems like it's dragging the story out, I think that was a good way to slow down this like very quick resolution we had.
Yeah.
And it does it drives the point home that we were just talking about, or talked about ad nauseum, about like the fulfillment for him of experiencing his home after not being there, of the adventure. Yeah.
Right.
And, anyways,
I think we got to get into this big Gandalf quote here.
Yes.
So, you want to read it?
Sure. Of course, said Gandalf. And why should not they prove true? Surely you don't believe the prophecies, because you had a hand in bringing them about yourself? You don't really suppose, do you, that all of your adventures and escapes were managed by mere luck, just for your sole benefit? You are a very fine person, Mr. Baggins, and I am very fond of you. But you are only quite a little fellow in a wide world after all. Thank goodness, said Bilbo, laughing, and handed him the tobacco jar.
All right, so this kind of will be where we finish up this lengthy luck discussion that we've been bringing up time and time again. I feel like this is where it's just completely explicitly clear that luck is the divine providence going on in this story.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. In this case, Gandalf is referencing prophecy.
Prophecy, and then he's also just saying, like, it wasn't just by mere luck that you
right.
you accomplished all this stuff, Bilbo.
That was an interesting concept. He was like, just because you supposedly participated in these prophecies you'd heard about, that doesn't make you not believe in them, does it?
Right,
like,
yeah.
You think you, the individual, are that important? It's like an interesting twist on that whole thing, because I think the way that we've talked about this throughout the whole book has been like Bilbo, the individual, for one reason or another, is very lucky or has providence with him. But this is the first time that Gandalf is like, it's not about you.
Right. Well, I think we should kind of dive into what providence is first for anybody that doesn't know, because I don't know if that's going to be a universally acknowledged thing.
So it's the capital of Rhode Island.
So I think it's usually shorthand kind of for like God's plan, if you ever hear that term. I don't really like it when they say like plan, because yeah, I think that's kind of a bad word, even if it's not wrong, because when you plan something, then after that follows the action, which isn't really correct because God's outside of the world and the universe, so like time doesn't apply to him. So he doesn't plan something and then it happens. You know, that would be kind of in time, which is problematic for like a number of reasons. So yeah, so using the word
implies predetermination, you're saying.
Yeah, definitely. And then like why can't stuff change or something's changed it better or whatnot. Yeah. So it's all just like active tense and more verb than noun really. Mm-hmm. Is the better way to think of it. And so yeah, so we're not going to do like a very excellent very precise, or what's a better word, scholarly. Thorough. Yeah, not a proper definition of this. But I mean, it's easy to say in life like one thing just happens after the other, and like maybe it's meaningless, or maybe the environment and conditions just determine all of our actions. And like, I'm not even saying that's not true, but there's more going on than that, and that's what like God's providence is. It's like, especially in all the troubling, bad, misfortunate times that we suffer through. There was a good line in here in one of Tolkien's letters. He quotes in one of his letters, he says, "Are not all of God's punishments also gifts?"
I mean, that I feel like that's like a classic, maybe a little bit cynical view. Like you grow from everything. Every shoot is a ladder type thing. Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean like that, but that's playing into like what we're kind of trying to define providence as. Like for people of faith, our lives aren't about us. We're kind of the ingredients of God's providential purposes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something I was going to say, like beyond, I don't want to make too many generalizations, but for most religions, there's like some element of like explaining to people or conveying that like there's something going on bigger than oneself.
Yeah, we're in a huge, giant story that's constantly getting weaved together, basically.
Right, and like somewhere, and like you can understand that narrative, like somewhere on one extreme is like maybe complete predetermination where the plot is already written and you are just like a pawn in it, or maybe not complete free will or complete chaos, but basically like all the independent pieces are like independent actors. But this providence, correct me if you disagree, but I'd say this providence is sort of like the flow of the story almost.
Yeah. There's a line from John Paul II. "For people of faith, there are no coincidences, only aspects of God's providence not fully understood." So, yeah, everything in this is part of a story. Mm-hmm. And yeah, like you said, it's flowing. Like we're currently in it, and it's... Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so, yeah, so in The Hobbit here, we've seen examples of this throughout. Like, the heavens literally align multiple times for them, as in to be able to read the map and then to open the door.
Yeah.
Like
the sun, the moon, the stars all have to be in the right place.
Right. And then we had seen two good righteous actions end up leading to good outcomes, specifically with like the Gollum scene, and then Bilbo was preparing to save his friends, to go back to the mountain to save his friends, and then he ends up finding them, and he goes and confronts a dragon, ends up finding the weak spot for it and everything. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Other examples of it too is it corrects for misdirection. So I mean in Mirkwood, they completely go off the path, completely screw up, they're totally lost, but then it ends up, by providence, they kind of find their way back to the I don't know, they get themselves out of the situation basically in a very weird way. But it ended up being the best way. Yeah, and then it can also even be like counterintuitive too. Like I think when Bilbo steals the Arkenstone, doesn't really seem like the right or easiest or best thing to do, but he also loyally returns to his friends and everything, and that ended up all being the right outcome and the right thing to do in that situation. And yeah, it led to the best outcome possible for him. Because without that, who knows if Thorin really would have ever redeemed himself, even if he did just die in battle. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think this is just very clearly, explicitly, God's providence going on. But then the other question is too, it's like, okay, well, does this really apply to Bilbo? Like, is Bilbo's like the force or God controlling this world? Is that like the same for us? And I'd say it actually is, because we mentioned briefly there's one head god, LOTR, and for all intents and purposes, he functions basically exactly like ours. This is so, and Middle Earth is supposed to be set in our world. It's just pre-Christian.
Okay.
So I mean that means like, yeah, God would exist, and that would still be that would still be our God, actually. So yeah, and so in this story though, God's providence does pay off for Bilbo himself. Like sometimes it's like, there's suffering that goes on and people, I don't know, like maybe it seems like a sad end, but eventually that brings about something greater or greater good later, maybe for people that live hundreds of years later. We don't really know at all in this life. We can't see it all until this life ends, really. But anyways, here, did it pay off for Bilbo? Yeah, it paid off for Bilbo right in his own life. Like, yes, he went on this life-changing adventure, and his life was changed for the better, but it wasn't just for him. Like, he didn't just go on this adventure just for himself. Like, it definitely benefited other people in Middle Earth, to be determined on all of it. But, I mean, that whole region of the Lonely Mountain is now just very prosperous and seems like it has peace for many years.
Right. Although I will say, I'm sorry if I'm going off topic, but like doubling back to the elf song, upon entering Rivendell, that like little kind of strange note of timelessness we got, where the elves are describing themselves and the forest and the water and the stars as a constant, while like the reign of men and kings and treasure rise and fall. It felt to me like that was in this conversation now, that's like an expression of not a different belief system, but like they're out of the flow, like they're in their own flow.
Yeah, the elves. Distinct. All right, okay, so something different might be for the elves, but let's say the men and the dwarves of Dale and the Mountain are much better off.
Mm-hmm. I just wanted to come back to that briefly because it was an interesting twist in my mind that if he is expressing this sort of flow of the providence of the story, that we would still get this glimpse of other aspects of the story that exist outside or in a different part of that same flow. Yeah. Like it's intriguing from a narrative standpoint that he would like make it that complicated. But anyways, back to this. So the providence of the men and elves.
Yeah, so it was beneficial for Bilbo. It was beneficial for others in Middle Earth and all the people ever. That's still to be determined, really. Because Lord of the Rings is a sequel, and it's fair to say events in this book affect what happens in that book to come.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But then it also was beneficial to really anybody that actually sat down and read the book themselves, like us, like the reader here in like this life, in this world.
Right.
Because, I mean, there was stuff to take away there. Like, yeah, no, we can't go on an adventure to go slay a dragon and transform ourselves. But, I mean, there's creature comforts in your world that are probably holding you back. And, like, this could be motivation or relatable on how to, like, kind of break free of that a little bit. What do you think?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it certainly makes sense. It's intriguing to compare this, like, this discussion or narrative about providence to a narrative we were talking about at the beginning of the book of like breaking out of the mold and Bilbo going from wanting everything to be perfect now. What was your
perfect easy now?
Okay, right.
Yeah, perfect.
Bilbo going from like that life of complete convenience and no fulfillment, rejecting that, taking on a life of no convenience and extreme challenge that provided him ultimately with way more fulfillment at the very end. That's like certainly a message of the book, or like almost an admonishment if we read this as him telling it to his children. How that specifically plays into like this broader narrative about providence and like how it benefits us as the reader.
Me personally, it makes me think like, how could I actually do this in my life? I'm not sure I have an answer to that yet. It definitely shakes me up to think about it. All right, cool. Clifford, how you been?
I've been good. Just passed my final architecture exam.
Ooh,
So
Mr. Architect.
on my way. Got to do some bureaucracy right now, but the hard part's over.
Nice.
Yeah. How was Moab?
It was fun.
You're out there biking, right?
Yeah, we biked through like arches and canyonlands and
Awesome.
stuff. On the way out there, though, we all hit like a huge. I don't know. There's like avalanches going on in Vale, so we all had to find like an alternate route around. Yeah, it was pretty fun. We I don't know. I thought it was funny because we were in a really crappy van, and it was like it was quite an adventure. Yeah. All right, let's. We gotta be quick about this though. So let's end this here. We got a review.
Sweet.
All right, this is from L. Grady. A smashing good time, 5 stars. I just started reading the LOTR series, and I thought I'd look into what podcasts were out there that I could listen to while I read. This is by far the best one. Clifford and Patrick offer thoughtful insights about the world of Middle-earth while also making me laugh. This podcast is pure gold. Oh, look at that.
That's a pretty good review.
Yeah, that was pretty good. L. Grady, why don't you send a email to talkingtokenpodcast@gmail.com and with your address and your name, and I'll get you a beer because you're out soon here. I'm kind of tired. All right, so I think we also got to, obviously this is for the last episode of The Hobbit. We weren't really sentimental at all in any way whatsoever. Partly because we know we got other stuff coming up, but yeah. But anyway, so I think we should say really quick what our plans are. We're gonna be off for the next couple months, but with sporadic special episodes, kind of. That's partly because Clifford's gonna be traveling a lot, and I'm gonna be preparing all the notes for Lord of the Rings. Yeah, so we're going to do all the notes for Lord of the Rings, but once we are ready to go for that, we're kind of just going to be rolling through the whole time without, pretty on-schedule stuff. So this should only be the really big break that we have from here until the end of Return of the King. But currently don't really know how long it's going to go. It could go a couple months, plan on a couple months. All right. Okay, well then let's, I don't know. That's the end of The Hobbit then, I guess. Actually, it's kind of not. We got a little bit other, probably some like special stuff coming out. But
do you want any sentimentality? Do you want any last reflections on The Hobbit?
No, I think we could say that for Lord of the Rings. This whole time we've done The Hobbit, and we've been gearing up for Lord of the Rings the entire time.
Okay.
I don't know. What do you want? Do you want sentimentality?
No, I'm also gearing up for Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I agree.
I have no emotions.
Cool. All right, well, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be around to talk to you soon. Thanks again, Clifford, for doing this whole adventure with me.
Thanks to you too, Patrick. And thanks to everyone for listening.